So today we're going to talk about personalized testing and what Dr. Jasby has made over the last 10 years. It's some really cool stuff. And I started to get involved with him back in, I don't know, was it last September, October that we met, somewhere in there? And then a little bit more like, hey, this has to exist. He's able to find issues in people that, to my knowledge, no other test is able to do. So I find it really exciting. If you know my history, cancer being in my family and that kind of thing, just kind of thinking, well, this can be life saving for a lot of people in the sense that we're able to find things really early from a metabolic perspective, how things are functioning and how people's bodies are acting. And so essentially, Dr. Jasby is just going to talk to you guys about personalized testing, what it means, what is kind of the standard there. And he has some things he's going to go over, but then we're going to get into kind of a Q&A, which is meant to be just a discussion with everybody here. You guys, once we get to that portion, feel free to turn your cameras on, your microphones on, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, Dr. Jasby, you want to take it from here?
Guys, thank you so much for coming today. We want to talk a little bit about the Aristotle test, but I would really like to highlight a case study of ours and highlight some. And it's a very generalized case study. We have case studies where customers come to us with very specific issues. They know kind of what they're dealing with. They're looking to analyze it from a different angle. What we are offering is a very comprehensive metabolomics panel. And metabolomics might be a little bit new to you. If you have any questions on what it is, we can talk about systems biology and its positioning relative to, genomics, proteomics, transcriptomics, the microbiome, et cetera. But metabolomics essentially is an omic science, and we can bring a level of depth of analysis, a sophistication of analysis that is really not available anywhere else other than research institutions that would use these tools for research and studies. And very quickly, I want to just introduce what the Aristotle test is. It's a comprehensive health assessment tool. And as I mentioned earlier, we have customers that come to us with, I want to monitor metabolites related to my breast cancer. I've been in remission for 3 years, and I'd like to keep an eye on it using metabolomics. We have people who come to us with very specific, irritable bowel conditions, with very specific conditions related to, liver health. For instance, like fatty liver disease. Most people who come to us are either looking to optimize their current health, which is already great in a lot of cases, and some people come to us because they have these vague symptoms. And so today I wanted to do a case study on one of our customers who we've anonymized to John Smith, and with his information, with his permission, we are sharing his real information, his metabolic data, but we're anonymizing him. And then we want to walk you through the process of what this is and what we do. The Aristotle test, developed by Therium, is a direct consumer at-home dry blood spot test that is given to us, and it comes back to our lab. We process it using a technique known as gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, which is an incredibly sensitive and specific analytical platform that enables us to analyze levels of these 126 aqueous metabolites that are in our biomarker panel, and do so at a very high throughput. And again, with very high sensitivity, we can detect levels of these metabolites. They're usually present in the micromolar concentration. We can go even lower than that to the picomolar or even sometimes femtomolar levels. What we do is we tailor that in the context of the overall omics composition, using advanced machine learning algorithms to analyze the data. And when we analyze the data, we report our data along 12 key health dimensions. Those can include things like mitochondrial health, inflammatory score, liver health, gut health, 12 health domains that are very integral to human functioning, and as well as can be really inferred using the metabolism. So there are some things about the human body that metabolism cannot speak to as directly as others. And so we've included and curated a validated health domains or validated metabolite sets for each one. So really, we believe in this very holistic philosophy, this Gestalt philosophy, that the whole is always greater than the sum of its parts. And current medical diagnosis and practice really relies on sort of discrete and disparate analysis of often unconnected health parameters.
What does
And
that mean? Can you break that down a little bit?
sure. So somebody will look at, like your sodium, your potassium, or somebody will look at, your ALT. And that's great. You should look at ALT, but without looking at levels of alanine, you really have no idea as to the functioning or enzymatic activity of certain enzymes or pathways. Looking at sort of, single point parameters is really great when you're dealing with a single point problem. But most health problems that are the greatest contributors to human morbidity and mortality are not single point factors, right? Heart disease is not caused by one thing. Alzheimer's and cancers are not caused, I almost spilled all of my coffee, are not caused by one thing. They are a very heterogeneous disorder, right? So when you're talking about something like in the context of, let's say autism management, there are 3,000 genes that have been implicated, significantly implicated with the incidence and progression of autism. So how can we look at one or two, behavioral dimensions or, some cognitive tasks and consider that really a complete analysis of that concept? And so we have developed the Aristotle test kit, which, I just got a comprehensive metabolic panel done at my physician's office. And by comprehensive, I mean it included 19 parameters. And most of them were basically trace minerals and ions, which can speak to certain things. Like you can get a really good sense of, your sodium potassium pump and its functioning, but you're not going to get a sense of global metabolic processes. And so with 19 parameters, you're really stuck looking at, less than 5%, if that, of total metabolism. And when you stack various tests that physicians can do, like a CBC with differential, thyroid test, et cetera, the common 5 tests that they do, maybe an OAT test, you get roughly 54 parameters. And that encompasses less than still 20% of global metabolic functioning, of known canonical human metabolism. And with the Aristotle test, we have taken advantage of the redundancy that is inherent in biology. So in metabolic pathways, one pathway will have, metabolites, A through C, and metabolites A and C are also present in, let's say, 14 other pathways. So if you monitor metabolites A through C correctly, you're not just getting one pathway, but you're actually being able to monitor, 4 or 5 pathways. And so we have picked those metabolites, what we term in the science as sentinel metabolites, sometimes referred to as housekeeping metabolites, that are most ubiquitous and most pervasive in human biochemistry. And by doing that, we can monitor a very impressive 68% of global metabolic functioning.
Would it be accurate to say, so in the context of some of these other tests that you're talking about, let's say they're trying to look for cancer, that they often pick up these markers that it's not like this global strategy that they're employing to say, like, how do I identify cancer, as much as like, as research is coming out and there's kind of this antiquated bandwagon that's following along, that they're picking up particular markers as it's being inferred in the science that this is correlated with cancer, which essentially what you get then is like this mixing and mashing of like these different markers, but it's not like a strategic implementation like you've created with like, hey, we're going to monitor with these 3 metabolites, 14 metabolic pathways. And then through that process, we're able to monitor 68% of the metabolic pathways that we know of.
Exactly. So as we stack these metabolites, we are able to gradually bring this number up to 68%. And like I said, that is, on an order of magnitude, we calculate 6.6 times as much as your routine wellness checkup tests. So like I said, CBC, thyroid test, OAT, and a complete metabolic panel, the CMP.
Yeah, those all combined.
Yeah, those all combined. If you stack them up, and then the data is being not analyzed with a machine learning algorithm that is validated on various health domains like integumentary health or mutational load. And, we can look at environmental toxin exposure. That data is being analyzed discretely by your physician's own knowledge. And so really the human brain cannot keep up with the vast amount of data that is generated in the omics sciences, right? So genomics, your geneticist isn't sitting there going through, your genes one by one, right? He's using a bioinformatic pipeline. And so with a science like metabolomics, you have to develop that. And so we have developed a bioinformatic pipeline that takes these 126 metabolites, it infers scores based on 1 through 10, a 1 through 10 normalized score on our 12 health domains that we've curated and validated from MIND data. And it also corroborates it with a set of 344 disease signatures validated in human blood. And that database is actually freely available. It takes scientists to collect that data from a dry blood spot sample and analyze it in that pipeline that is, again, a free resource. So we have parts of our tests that are proprietary and parts that are based on the scientific literature and are in the public domain as well. And this is the test kit that our customers receive when they get it. And like I said, the process is incredibly simple. There's a dry blood spot sample that is returned to our lab. That sample undergoes, various scientific processing steps that will include, matrix separation. So separating the blood from the dry blood spot sample. We then, go through and precipitate proteins, extract the aqueous metabolite layer. We dry that to, sort of chemical residues. We derivatize them to make them suitable for analysis with gas chromatography, mass spectrometry. And then we monitor them in our proprietary bioinformatics pipeline that, my co-founder and I have spent the majority of our doctoral and postdoctoral fellowships developing. And so this is the actual machine. This is what GCMS is. This is in our actual lab in downtown Phoenix. And again, we are using separation along 2 dimensions. So we have gas chromatography and mass spectrometry. These are 2 separate techniques, and what we call this is a hyphenated platform, meaning that there's a chromatography that happens that separates chemicals and compounds, these 126 metabolites, based on what we call a retention time. It's essentially the time it takes metabolites to come off of our column. And then we can separate them not just from retention time, but on their mass to charge ratio, which is their weight, their molecular weight. And by using these 2, sort of 2-dimensional separation techniques, we are able to have a very, very high specificity regarding what these metabolites are and their quantities. So we have, excellent metabolite identification and quantitation. And so this is kind of a truncated list of the metabolites that we develop, right? And that we collect. And so you see 1 through 10, 41 through 50, et cetera, et cetera. But there are in total 126 of them. And we go through and we will create what we call a digital twin of you. Now we do your analyses and your health scores based upon what we have for you. And so your health scores I'll show, I believe, on the next slide. And we create recommendations based on those health scores. Calculating the health score is just one part of what we do. Calculating your health scores, your disease signatures, and where you're at is kind of the first step. I can talk about, the advanced AI we use and the very sophisticated machine learning algorithms we've developed. But really, that's just kind of, okay, here's where you're at. What we are doing in addition to that is what's known as digital twinning. So we create, and this slide is a little misleading, we create a mathematical abstraction of our customers using levels of their 126 metabolites, as well as their survey responses from our Omni survey, which is a very comprehensive biopsychosocial survey that is, again, an abridged and compiled, we call it the Omni because it's really an omnibus of various validated health questionnaires that are used in scientific research, things like the Beck Depression Index, food frequency questionnaire, occupational health exposure questionnaire. These are the validated surveys that we are bringing in and truncating, the various relevant parts to metabolism and including in this holistic whole. So when you receive your Aristotle Health Test Kit, you will register your kit's barcode at our HIPAA compliant Ethereum registry. And once you register it, your name, date of birth, everything, barcode, you will be asked the 33 questions, which help contextualize our recommendations. Because what we're doing is, again, this digital twinning platform. We monitor your levels, we combine it with your self-report information to create a digital data point replica of a person. And this practice actually comes from industrial engineering, aerospace industry. Specifically, this was developed by NASA in an effort to simulate the effects of space travel on various parts that they were constructing, and being able to simulate the effects of various physical forces that a certain part would experience in the course of interstellar travel. That is one way to mitigate and reduce costs associated with continuously designing a product, fabricating it, testing it in some sort of physical chamber, and then figuring out what works and what doesn't, and then testing it again. But by doing so in silico and simulating that in a sort of digital statistical way, NASA was able to really cut down on their fabrication time, their fabrication costs, et cetera. And what we're doing is the same way. We are sparing our customers from thousands of times of experimentation with various health information or advice that they may be hearing from this, that, and the other source. What we've done, so we've this next slide here, this is one of our.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So
Sure.
essentially, what you're saying is like, so a lot of tests do produce recommendations, but it's usually like buy my B12, which applies to like 95% of people out there, right? Like B12 deficiency, right. Vitamin D deficiency or something. Sure. And so it's kind of this broad brushstroke. So what you guys are doing though is your recommendations are not recommendations just based off the data. They're recommendations based on, hey, we are taking this great body of science and this literature that is out there and mapping that to you. And when we run tests on you in this digital platform, we're finding out the things that boost your scores the highest or push you out of this disease signature, risk factor signature to the most likely degree. So you're essentially taking this body of science and doing the trial and error for me so that I don't have to go out there and do this. I need to try this supplement, see if my score goes up. Oh, that didn't work. Try this supplement, score went up a little bit. And so you guys are basically shortcutting that. And is that an accurate way to describe it?
That is a perfect way to describe it, Micah. And I know you're not really involved in the science side of our operation, so I appreciate your profound understanding. Yes, absolutely. We have taken, so there's a bunch of generic health advice. Take B12. Well, taking B12 depends on what dosage, what frequency. Does the person have specific levels of enzymes that can process B12, right? Like methionine synthase. Is it working? Is it not? What about their folate levels? Folate and B12 are intricately linked, and so if you have depleted folate, you might end up in this, what we in the metabolomics world we call a folate trap. And so you might have all this B12, but you're not getting any of the results. So it really depends on the kind of the person that is receiving the treatment. The treatment itself is just as important as the kind of person who's receiving that treatment. And so we have kind of lost sight of that. And, I had a comprehensive metabolic panel done, as I mentioned, a couple of weeks ago, and my health recommendations were absolutely laughable. And what we've done is we've said, okay, let's look at the science and the literature. Let's take validated studies from, very high impact journals, peer-reviewed literature, and let us extract the various interventions they've done, whether that's mindfulness techniques from specific apps that have been published on, whether that's B12 supplementation, whether that is chewing your food a certain number of times, whether that is using air purifiers, whether that is a specific regimen of HIIT training to increase mitochondrial biogenesis. We have curated over 500 of these interventions, and we take that digital twin of yours, and so these are the health domains, and I'll go to the digital twin slide. We take this in silico model of you, and given the interventions that we have and your metabolic milieu, which we've gleaned from your dry blood spot sample, we simulate each one of these interventions 1,000 times on your digital replica. And by doing that, we are able to close these health gaps. So here you see, where your digital twin could be, if you, during time points on specific scores, if you were to implement this regimen. And our system is designed to give you those recommendations. And we go through those thousands of iterations and using various statistical parameters, pick the ones that are the most beneficial to you, both in terms of their time investment, your money investment, as well as the opportunity cost of potentially doing other things in that time you could have been doing that would have been more helpful for you, more beneficial for you. So what we were doing is we're experimenting on digital mica, in an effort to spare the real mica, tons of lost time, money, and a lost health gap. This health gap is what we're always trying to close. And by using our digital twinning platform and our very sophisticated machine learning algorithms, we're able to simulate these effects to sort of cut to the chase and offer you what is going to be the most beneficial for you in particular. And so I want to go through, as I mentioned, a customer profile. And this customer who wanted to remain anonymous was very okay with us sharing his real details. He's going through basically, he's the everyman. He really is the everyman. This is not one of our customers who has a very, discrete issue that they're looking to get, health advice on this kind of one thing. They know what it is. They know what to look for. So John, he's 52 years old. He's a software developer for a very big company. He lives a completely sedentary lifestyle, works out none. He works 50 plus hours and reported incredibly high stress. Now, his health concerns were this myriad of very generic and sort of broad symptoms that could apply to many things. So chronic fatigue, regular headaches, tons of digestive issues, both in the morning and night, and he was sleeping only on average 5 to 6 hours. What he reported as his lifestyle: regular alcohol consumption, 2 or more drinks a day, predominantly processed foods. John reported working in the office, regularly getting, Uber Eats and DoorDash delivered. He was in this, very fast-paced work environment and didn't even have time to really, go out and, get food. So him and all of his colleagues regularly would order to the office. At night, John was a divorced individual, and so at night he'd go home, he'd grab something on the way home, and he only had one real diagnosed disease, and that was elevated blood pressure. So we identified some important metabolic risks in his health report. One was elevated levels of taurine, which is an important amino acid, and this wasn't really too much of a surprise to us because one of the greatest associations taurine has is with hypertension. So elevated cysteamine levels we indicated as being really, the most probable cause of his gastrointestinal inflammation, which we thought was the root of his digestive issues. Elevated oxalic acid. Oxalic acid is a very important metabolite related to energy production, and it is associated, and levels can be very much indicating consumption of processed foods. And then low spermine and spermidine. So this is really poor cellular health, accelerated aging. These levels in a man of his age may even indicate adrenopause. And so this was sort of the areas of concern that were the most highlighted. Like I said, there are 12 health domains. We report 344 blood disease signatures, but to address his specific concerns, this is really what we focused on using our digital twinning platform. Okay, so recommendation. We asked John to cut his so this is crazy. We asked John to cut his cigarette smoking down to no more than 4 cigarettes per day using information. We couldn't ask him to quit. He was sort of unable to quit. He said he enjoyed smoking, wanted to continue. Okay, so if you're not willing to quit, let's look at what the literature says is the most beneficial or has at least the less deleterious effect. So we said 4 cigarettes, and we want you to cut your alcohol consumption to no more than 2 drinks at each sitting, no more than twice a week. Now, this is important because these are the issues that are going to elevate his taurine levels. This is going to lead to increased blood pressure, elevated homocysteine, elevated risk of cardiovascular disease. So he started quitting smoking. He first went down to 2 weeks to 4 cigarettes a day. He reduced his alcohol consumption to moderate levels as suggested immediately. After 4 months of implementing our program, John then went into a smoking cessation program, some hotline he was introduced to. Cut that out completely. And after suffering from, high blood pressure for more than a decade, John was able to normalize it as well as improve his overall sense of well-being, his sort of 1 to 10 report on his overall mood and sense of well-being. Next thing we implemented was an incorporation of a high fiber diet for John. This was really important in recommending, 50 grams of fiber once every morning, and we supplemented it with probiotics. And so this was really important for, changing the sort of microbiotic milieu of his gut lumen. And he reported immediate reduction in his sense of inflammation in the digestive tract. When John retested 4 months later, his inflammatory score was improved by 3 points, which is a significant improvement on the bounds of our 1 through 10 test. He integrated and he was having these, high fiber smoothies with, metamucil compounds, integrating fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and then with his daily probiotic supplement, he reported a significant reduction in digestive issues. His gut health score went up by 2 points upon his 4-month retesting. Now we addressed his oxalic acid. I forgot one thing here. Oh, sorry. One thing I wanted to say is that we are able to, for instance, when we say a high fiber diet, how much fiber, how often? We are able to simulate that using our digital twinning platform, using the information that we have banked from scientific studies. So we are saying 50 grams of fiber every morning, and we're giving a time period for that. And that is because we want the fiber in there at the same time he's taking his probiotic. And when we say probiotic, we're now saying, okay, not just take a probiotic, but we're giving him specific strains, and we're telling him we want at least 50 billion colony forming units. We're being very precise. Now on the screen, I'm just sort of putting up talking points to reduce the amount of text that our viewers get, but we are incredibly precise with what we tailor to our customers, whether it's how much to take, when to take it, how often to take it, when to retest, what foods to avoid, what supplements to avoid. You'd be shocked, at how often we have somebody come in and say, I'm taking this thyroid medication, and it's supposed to alleviate all the symptoms I'm having, but it's just not. What is going on? So we'll do a full panel on them. And when we report, when they report to us what supplements we're taking, this is another real case study from a customer last week, and I'm kind of going off track here, but she reported taking Cytomel, which is a synthetic T3 hormone, and she was not getting the benefits of it. But when we looked at her metabolic profile, when we looked at her self-report, we realized that she's supplementing with high doses of magnesium at the same time as she's taking her Cytomel. So just a very quick analysis, and I don't know how her primary care physician or her pharmacist didn't indicate this, but the magnesium is contraindicated with Cytomel. So as she was taking the magnesium, it was binding her hormones, and it was the synthetic hormones she was ingesting as a medication, and it was preventing absorption in her gut. So the supplement she's taking for improved health is actually preventing her medication from working. And so by just decoupling this, and our digital twinning platform recommended that she take them at least 4 hours apart. She emailed me the next week and said, I have such an immediate and sustained improvement. Thank you for just highlighting this very basic thing. We had one lady, Micah, as you know, one really, really great older woman who was trying to be healthy, and she was going to work every day with meal prepped foods. Like, she was meal prepping, and she was being very mindful about the portion and the composition of her foods. And she would go to work and heat up these foods, right? And then when we looked at her metabolic profile, she's feeling lethargic, she's chronic fatigue, gastric issues again. But in her case, what we were noticing in her environmental toxin exposure index was a signature related to heated up plastics. And we were saying, okay, so when you go to work, do you heat it up in a plastic container? Oh, yes, I do. And we immediately said, okay, well, that's the issue that we're picking up. That's the signature we're picking up in your metabolism. Switch to a glass container. And so we can get very sort of granular with our recommendations, given how much data we collect and how sophisticated our analysis is. And so going back to John here, one thing we said was say, okay, you really have to, kind of cut it down on how often you're ordering the Uber Eats, how often you're picking up something on the way home. So we transitioned to the whole food diet, right? And the whole food diet is a real diet, and we gave a very specific regimen for him to follow. John was very motivated and had some resources, so he actually consulted with a nutritionist outside of Therion to set up his meal plan. And the idea was that we were trying to reduce the production of oxalates, the intake and the production of oxalates. This is going to improve his kidney function and his kidney score. And so this is sort of the value. And he reported, in addition to, the alleviation, the frequency of his headaches, we can say, well, the frequency of the headaches wasn't due to some neurocognitive disorder, which we can pick up in our neurocognitive index. We can say this seems to be due, your headaches seem to be due to activated, HPA axis and overproduction of cortisol. That could also be due, to his hypertension. His hypertension was related to taurine, and his headaches were related to his, poor kidney function, which in turn was being caused by this high intake of oxalates. And being able to identify that and delineate these potential causes, we were able to really give John an improvement in his health scores. And so I just want to end with some, 3 testimonials we have from our customers. The improvements they're getting in their life, how straightforward it can be in a lot of cases, how eye-opening it is for a lot of people, talking about things such as, I haven't felt good in a really long time. This test was a very quick gateway for me to access the information and analysis that can really delineate the potential causes and associations of my health and give me actionable, direct, specific, granular recommendations for me to follow. People mention, like I said, some people will retest with us in 6 months and say, over the course of these 6 months, I felt better. Some people will say it's immediate. Some people email me, the week after they've begun, their personalized health protocol, and give us these sort of testimonials, which I've snipped from either my emails or various messages I've even received on LinkedIn. So that is kind of where I'm at. This is kind of a very open-ended. I did not go into the science. I did not go into sort of the deep analysis of our blood disease signatures. This is our team. If you have any questions, please let us know, info@therio.me. Our test is normally $830. Micah has set up a code HEALTHY to receive $331 off. But other than that, I'm here to sort of answer questions that our audience may have on the test, its benefits, and what they can expect. Micah, you're muted.
My bad. I'll drop a link in the chat here too. We're going to get into Q&A and just kind of have open discussion here. But essentially with that link, if you click that link, it automatically applies that code HEALTHY for $331 off when you go into checkout. So if you're interested, you can get that discount just by clicking that link that's in the chat right now. But let's get into Q&A. So if you guys want, go ahead and unmute, turn your cameras on, or just drop it into the chat, and we'll just have a discussion from here.
Yeah, there's a question on long haul COVID, and that's a really good one.
Yeah, you want to go ahead and answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So who asked that? Was that Bev?
Yeah, it was Bev.
Yeah, Bev. Thanks for
and
asking.
Can you take screen share off too? Sorry.
Okay, we'll go sort of more.
Hi.
Hi, Bev. We do regularly get long haul COVID, and I have some relevant papers on COVID myself. We've published 3 papers, spanning the Journal of Clinical Translation, Communications Medicine, and Vaccines. And in these papers, we kind of discuss the cascading sequelae of COVID, and yeah, absolutely. The viral effects of COVID are deeply intertwined with metabolism. When you want to address something like COVID, it's really important you look at metabolites. It's really important you look at proteins. Either of these levels will be a great testing platform. Genomics, obviously less so. And we have prescribed various supplementations that can help with COVID. We have banked information on COVID long haul and things like vitamin E, vitamin K, vitamin D, specific dosages and frequencies given, of course, customers' metabolic profile. So we have a set of supplements we traditionally recommend. Everything from, it depends. If you have a certain metabolic profile, we might recommend CoQ10 for increased mitochondrial function, which is implicating decreased mitochondrial output, decreased mitochondrial synthesis, decreased mitochondrial size, is really the leading theory as to what is happening, between post, infection and the long haul symptoms remaining. And there's various things we can recommend. And so, for instance, depending on your, metabolic profile, we might recommend CoQ10 at certain dosages. We might recommend the more bioavailable form as ubiquinol. Depending on your metabolic profile, we might recommend specific, exercises, mindfulness activities. We can also recommend specific therapies that have been shown to help with mitochondrial health, such as red light therapy, and recommend specific intensities of light, wavelengths of light, durations of light. So we have a few tools at our disposal, and unfortunately, we are seeing long haul COVID more and more, and we've had success. I like to, we've tested less than 300 people. However, we have a more than 99% success rate with our protocols, and that includes
300 long COVID people.
No, just in general. No, just in general, as we've sort of transitioned from our development phase to beta testing phase, and now we're sort of operating on, a full pipeline, and we have people doing, every sort of aspect of it, and we have good throughput. There's no bottlenecks in our processes. We've tested since then, after coming out of beta testing, less than 300 people, and we have had a 99% success rate. About a dozen of those individuals, I would say, came to us specifically for long haul COVID, and we were able to help all 12 or more of those people. Yeah.
And Sheldon, I see you raise your hand. You want to go ahead and ask your question, man? And it's good to see you.
Sheldon, you're muted. Your name sounds very familiar. Have you tested with
We've
us?
emailed, I believe.
There it is. Sorry, my
right.
screen froze. I couldn't.
Oh, you're good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. Hey, Micah, Dr. Jasby. So I got the test done, and I just had a clarifying question. So all the markers at the bottom, those are the 344 metabolites when it shows kind of my concentration versus what the norm ratios are.
No, those are the 126 metabolites, Sheldon. So when you received that was like each level of the metabolite, what is the ratios? Either some of those ratios are established by the Institute of Medicine, and there's enough data to support that. Most of them are not. Metabolomics is a woefully underutilized scientific approach. Although, in terms of, like, for instance, like oncological practices, oncologists have been very quick to adopt it. It's had a lot of success in treating cancers and informing oncologists on diagnoses and various therapies, and stratifying patients to fit their best therapies, and monitoring response to those therapeutic interventions. Metabolomics has been, really great at that, and oncologists have sort of led the vanguard in medical adoption, but it is still generally underutilized. So those ratios you're seeing are either constructed from known harmful and beneficial levels in the literature, and that's the 126 pages at the end. Your 344 blood disease signatures are in the disease signature report. And we've kind of updated the format, I believe, since maybe you've tested, but we report a set. So it'll say something, breast cancer. We actually just had this, and it'll say, total number of metabolites. So these are total number of metabolites in our panel that have been validated as biomarkers of breast cancer. And then I'll say total matched metabolites, right, Sheldon? And so that is a number of metabolites. And we explain this in that little paragraph just beneath. And it's very hard to describe things like effect size and, clinical significance in lay terms. We're trying our best, and I hope we did an okay job.
And there's free consults too, by the way.
Right. Yeah. So you get a 30-minute free consult with either myself, my co-founder, or another member of our science team, depending on the schedule and availability. You can see all of our schedules and book one of us. You will always meet with a PhD or an MD. We do not put you in front of somebody who's been trained for a couple weeks and they're personalized health liaison. I know a lot of entities do that. You will always receive the focus of somebody who is trained either in medicine or molecular biology. And so Sheldon, back to your question. You have total number of metabolites, what's the metabolites in our panel that can speak to that condition. Then you have total matched metabolites, which are the number of metabolites in your metabolic profile. They're not just a lot of us have metabolites that are biomarkers of various things, but did they go up or down in the ranges that we would expect to see if that disease were there, right? And then we have a match percentage, which is basically, match metabolites over total. And you'll see something in your report called confidence. And that is essentially a measure of type 1 error in statistics and bioinformatics. This is a measure of how sure are we in the result. We do not report any result where we have less than 95% confidence. So although, Sheldon, we corroborated your metabolomic profile against 344 disease signatures that we validated, we only report those whose matches we're confident in at least 95% or greater. So what is type 1 error? It's the chance that there's some sort of statistical error, that there was some sort of issue with the pipette our research technician used to process your sample. There was some gradual shift potentially in the machine that led to an erroneous conclusion. And so in science, when we report our results for publication, we report everything at a 95% confidence interval. We don't say this was different than this, but how sure are you that this difference is not due to chance? How sure are you that it's a real statistical difference? And actually, this level of confidence comes from the 1920s and agricultural sciences and what they were using to say, okay, how do we know when we treat a plot of land and it grows? How do we know it's really there, not like the weather or like a bug, a swarm came through and didn't eat it? How do we know? So they did 20 plots of land with a certain soil additive. And if it worked 19 out of 20 times, they said this one works. It's not due to chance. It actually comes from agricultural science and still used as, the sort of, rule of thumb, not a rule of thumb, but it's the gold standard for reporting results in science and medicine.
Hey, I appreciate the explanation. That really helps a lot. Yeah, because I've got myself, always just not an expert in the biohacking stuff, but, just look at my report and I'm like, geez, from the gut health was 4 and then I think my liver was 5. So I was like, between being specific with the probiotic. So I definitely want to book a call with y'all because a lot of my clients too, I was wanting to use this. I'd started having them order the test, but so I at least had to more appreciate explaining that. So I have a better ability to go back and even my results and look at it. And I guess get with you on that because, maybe it is a supplement or maybe it's something I'm just, that's off that is not resonating for those scores to be higher.
I 100% think you should book the consult, Sheldon. Absolutely, because in addition to the recommendations you got in the report, we will break apart those scores which are non-optimal, so they're sub 4, and we will really delve into that and give you an even more personalized and granular protocol with even more details. So we can't really do that for every score. We found that it becomes overwhelming and our customers don't know really where to focus. And we want to give everyone, that streamlined experience, that this is what's important for you. This is what to do to get there. And so really we've kind of have these recommendations, which although, can be readily applied and will help in every way, we do get a little bit more granular in those consults. So I 100% recommend you book one with us.
Appreciate it, Dr. Jasby. Thanks, Micah. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Roxanne, I will have you up next. I just got a quick question here. Any studies available on the reliability and validity of the test? It's a question by Michelle.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this Aristotle test is an adaptation of all of the work I have done in my doctoral training and my postdoctoral training. And we are doing the same things, except we're doing it from a dry blood spot sample. So we have done it from dry blood spot in various publications. We've done it from CSF, tissue biopsies. We've done analysis that is not related to humans. We've done metabolite analysis in wastewater for various epidemiological surveillance monitorings. And we like I said, we've done it from urine, plasma, various parts of the bone, and it's the same profile. It's the same process, meaning so the metabolite extraction step is the exact same. the mass spec parameters that are used to chemically separate and filter, the exact same. The bioinformatics that we use are the exact same. The only difference is that they're applied to a single sample rather than a control group and a case group.
Yeah, and that's in reference to the studies that you've done. And also you have a number of published studies on different disease states, such as breast 1 cancer and the metabolic association and the metabolite association, correct?
Right. Most of my work is in biomarker discovery and validation. So, I mean, maybe somebody, if you Google my name, you can see my Google Scholar profile. And if you just go through my Google Scholar profile, you'll see the studies that are, they're all metabolomics. And all of those studies that have used GCMS, the underlying method is the Aristotle test. It is everything we've done. And so what's important is, when this isn't going to really make sense to anybody, but the ionization voltages, the temperature ramp on the GC's oven, certain injection volumes, detector and AC/DC parameters. These are the things that are really make a mass spec method and how we collect data, validate it, and apply it. I've used it to look at, published studies on, early stage breast cancer. Our research group was the first ever to publish and patent a blood and urine disease signature for valley fever, coccidioidomycosis, a fungal infection. It's very prevalent in Arizona. And we're still publishing. I mean, we are still utilizing these platforms and our insights. My co-founder and I, we have a paper right now under review at Nature Communications. And so, there's publishing, which a lot of these entities do in these really like unscrupulous predatory journals that, are kind of like pay to play things. And then there's publishing in, Cell, Nature, Science. And that's the level of research we're doing. And so it is very much, sort of high science brought to the reach of the consumer. So there's absolutely a dozen or more studies that we've done that have used the Aristotle method, the data collection and data analysis method in the context of various diseases spanning from intermittent fasting, cancer, Alzheimer's, what else have we done? Screen time. We have this really cool study in Scientific Reports, yeah, absolutely, Michelle. I will, Micah, if you wouldn't mind just grabbing Michelle's email, I can send her a list of what we do and the studies that have validated.
And I'll link your Google Scholar page here too.
Sure, yeah, please, yeah, feel free to do that. And so we did a study on screen time and looking at the effects of screen time on the microbiome and the metabolome. And we were able to come up with very distinct signatures for those having 75 minutes or less of screen time a day, or those having 75 minutes or more. We've looked at biomarkers of aging, environmental toxicity to TBBPA, which is a brominated flame retardant. We have looked at, let me look at my own Scholar page because I forget what we've done. Recently, we've looked at, the inflammation and pathological progression of Alzheimer's disease using this very method, this very machine. So that study, that is the most recent study I published in Acta Neuropathologica, an incredibly good world-class journal with an impact factor of 17, which is very, very high. Our other competitors in this space are publishing in, sort of very low journals, impact factor less than 1. And I don't want to disparage any entities. Science is sort of a collaborative and cumulative effect. But we looked at, the progression of Alzheimer's related to choline and acetylcholine levels, validated a set of metabolic markers that can reliably, accurately, with more than 90% accuracy, speak to the progression of Alzheimer's in these humans and mice. And so we use 2 models, which is another reason why we publish in this really great journal. And it's using the same method as the Aristotle. It is using the actual machine, the actual mass spec that we use in our lab, because that machine is a part of a research laboratory as well as contracted to Therion. And we were able to show, that there's a very specific and sensitive way to measure Alzheimer's progression in living subjects from the blood. We've also looked at targeted metabolomics for, metabolic alterations related to the disease process in older adults. This was a really great study we published in Neuroscience. We looked at genetic markers, metabolite expression of those genetic markers, and had the pleasure of working with George Weinstock on that paper. George Weinstock is sort of the father of modern genetics, actually. And so we're very privileged to have him on that. Other, more recent studies, an integrative cellular metabolomic study reveals downregulated TCA cycle and potential biomarkers of exposure to this TBBPA, which I referenced earlier. That's published in Environmental Toxicology. That is a flux analysis. So it's a little bit different, whereby we labeled lung cells with heavy carbon, C13. That's an isotope of carbon. And we're able to trace the progression of that carbon through various cell processes, organelles, and tissues, specifically in these lung cells. And this was published in Environmental Toxicology. Can the Aristotle check for mold in the body? Yes, absolutely, Jed. I have one publication in my list, for instance, Candida. We can look at Candida. We can look at, coccidioidomycosis, which I mentioned is a fungal and mold disorder. Now, that's just my research, though. Our database is informed by over 5,000 different papers reporting, sometimes dozens of biomarkers. And so we do have signatures for mold toxicity. Jed, I had a consult with a couple, husband and wife. They had the same environmental toxin exposure index, and both of them, in that index, we were sort of doing a sub-analysis of that index. We were able to see that that was really due to mold toxicity. Now, lo and behold, they had rampant mold in their home maybe about 5 years ago. They had gone through the home and extensively gotten the mold out. They've repaired it, patched it up, and everything. The husband said that he would, go into the crawl spaces and attics and regularly and check for it, but he still had this signature. And so they were unwilling to go through the house again. So what we did was we actually, recommended a specific, air purifiers with a very specific filter rating, and sort of mapping it out as to where they should put them. Not where they should put them. They sort of did that, but recommending a certain square footage coverage for each one. And so they were sort of unwilling to look at, well, is the mold there? They were kind of sure something was there. We were seeing that in their metabolic profile. When I brought it up to them in their combined consultation, they were kind of shocked because they don't report that in the survey. And we were saying, we see some signatures of mold toxicity. Could you have exposure to it? And they kind of both looked at each other first. They looked at me and said, yeah, 5 years ago, we had all these issues and we're not going through the house again. So what should we do about it? And so we were able to recommend, again, a very specific filter rating for their use case, as well as making sure that, each air purifier had a certain square footage coverage to maintain a healthful air environment.
And Roxanne, did you still have your question? You had your hand raised a second ago. So if you're still in the room, feel free to jump in and ask your question.
Yes, my son, who is a young adult, contracted diabetes type 2 around 2020. And he was on probably 175 units of 2 kinds of insulin injections a day. But he's now, just through his and my own research, got his sugar under control, and he's off of all of this. And his endocrinologist is very happy about it. But he is stuck with weight. It's almost as if he looks at an apple and gains weight. So anything with carbs or any kind of carb at all, even if it's good, seems to keep him stuck in this obese state, even though he eats very clean. I mean, I'm a witness to it. And he would love to shed this weight. He exercises and he's stuck. What can I tell him about your test that might convince him to have this done?
Right. That's excellent. We have looked at a lot of things related to carbohydrate metabolism. Most of our metabolites are metabolites of the oxidative phosphorylation pathway. And so they're actually very well suited to looking at specifically carbohydrate metabolism. And so, we can look at various things. The Aristotle test, and this is something we get all the time. And we have, myself and my co-founder, we've published a lot of research on intermittent fasting and calorie restriction and the effects of those on the gut microbiome and metabolome. And so the Aristotle test, to address your question more specifically, is what we can do right now. It's primarily assessing a broad spectrum of metabolites, and it's providing an intricate view of various metabolic pathways. In the context of carbohydrate metabolism and insulin sensitivity, several of our metabolites, just off the top of my head, can offer really significant insights into an individual's metabolic status and metabolic efficiency, which is really, I think, the concept that we would want to address with your son. And so there's tons of metabolites. Just off the top of my head, we have glucose 6-phosphate and fructose 6-phosphate, and these are metabolites that you can't get anywhere else. You really just cannot. There's no panel that assesses them. They're not a part of routine clinical diagnostics. Although these are the metabolites that physicians study in medical school. These are the metabolites that scientists study when we really want to get a sense of insulin signaling. So glucose 6-phosphate, fructose 6-phosphate, these levels of both of them can help understand how well the body is metabolizing glucose, which is the primary carbohydrate. We also have cyclic AMP, which is involved in the regulation of glycogen and lipid metabolism. So investigating levels of it in your son will give us an idea of how well he's storing, retrieving glycogen and lipids, etc. So abnormal levels of that would indicate very specific issues with energy balance and storage. We can also look at insulin sensitivity, not just by looking at glucose and insulin levels. Insulin, by the way, is very hard to measure in living adults. So we don't measure it directly either, although when we build out our whole ecosystem of testing and we get to proteomics, we definitely will. But we can observe metabolites that are associated with insulin resistance, like specific amino acids. We have 59 different amino acids in our Aristotle panel, and those amino acids can speak very clearly to insulin resistance and fatty acids as well, which we have a couple dozen of those as well. And so the elevated levels of these metabolites can signify, either increased carbohydrate intake, even as a marker of intake, altered carbohydrate metabolism, which could potentially correlate with his insulin resistance, which could lead to weight gain, even with controlled blood glucose levels. And so based on the metabolic profile, we can, tailor very specific dietary recommendations made to optimize his carbohydrate metabolism, improve his, insulin sensitivity, and of course, manage his weight more effectively. And these can include recommending a diet with a balanced ratio of macronutrients, focusing on complex carbohydrates, lean proteins, healthy fats, and monitoring, in the case of your son, monitoring the progress is going to be really, really critical. So we would want to retest at specific timelines, implementing, after those lifestyle interventions and dietary changes, we want to monitor the impact on his carbohydrate metabolism by getting, a sort of longitudinal assessment of those levels, and as well as his overall metabolic health, and adjust those recommendations, as we go. So we could say something like, given your current insulin usage and the specific metabolite alterations we identified, we could recommend this very balanced, nutrient-dense diet with a, controlled intake of low glycemic carbohydrates, with a very specific physical activity regimen, and even stress management techniques. So a lot of times, we're gaining weight because of, this activation of what's known as the HPA axis, or the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And so these, combined strategies, in addition to regular monitoring, would be, I think, pivotal in managing weight gain and optimizing his metabolic health.
Yeah. And that leads into another good question here by Gene. It says, I would like to know if and how this test deals with hormones. Is that part of the metabolic process?
Yes. So hormones are proteins. And like I said, we alluded to just a little bit earlier, we do intend to build out the full ecosystem of omics testing, going from the metabolism. We have our, ILIA, which is a gut microbiome test, coming out, very, very shortly, hopefully within the next couple of months. And then we will go to proteomics, transcriptomics, and genomics eventually. But the proteome is where hormones are. They're proteins. We cannot measure proteins directly, but we do get a sense of their overall synthesis and catabolism using, again, the 59 amino acids, 20 something of which are proteinogenic, and they contribute and are parts of those proteins, whether that's, tyrosine, tryptophan, serotonin. Those are the sort of constituents that are going into hormone production and eventually degradation. And by looking at those levels, we do get an oblique view at hormones. And we had one patient who came in with chronic, regular lung infections. And we were able to show that it was a protein issue, a hormone issue, and we were able to do that by inferring to his eicosanoid pathways. And eicosanoids are these, hormone-like substances that go into hormones as well. And by addressing this, his doctor was able to give him a specific enzyme treatment. And he used to get lung infections every year around Thanksgiving time. And by just addressing sort of, hey, this is the metabolic makeup we see, and this is what we think is going on upstream, his physician was able to make a very clear recommendation and get that taken care of. So we don't look at proteins, but we can look at them obliquely, just like we don't look at yet the gut microbiome directly looking at its composition, but knowing the relative metabolic fluxes of various strains of bacteria in the human gut, specifically in the Western human gut, which is most of our clients, we are able to estimate levels of those given, again, their known consumption and production rates of metabolites, and say, we think your gut composition is roughly, this much Akkermansia, this much Bacteroides, this much Clostridia. So that is sort of the beauty of metabolomics, being downstream of everything. It is able to make very specific causal inferences upstream to various levels of omics.
All right. Well, we've gone for an hour and it's been a really good discussion. I want to do more of these, and Dr. Jasby is also going to be doing each Wednesday, 10 a.m. your time, or is it 7 a.m. your time?
You tell me. You populate my calendar and I should show up.
I think it's
10 a.m.
your time.
Arizona.
Yeah, that's what I think too. And so there is a way to sign up through the website. And I'll be giving some more information to that as we go, but that'll be just weekly kind of conversations. We're going to be doing some webinars and on different topics too. So we'll take a more granular approach on like, hey, what's going on in the neurocognitive index? What's going on in the liver index? What do you usually see in the liver index, and how does that have an impact on people's lives? What are things that people typically miss? What are some of the personalized recommendations that come from that? And just giving kind of an overall view to it. And then as Dr. Jasby said, he's going to be building out this whole suite of testing products. And essentially the cool thing with that, and in addition to some of the other stuff, if you guys know testing, this is like altogether different at this point. If you don't know testing, it's altogether different. But basically with these different testing platforms, there's these systems of biology that he talked about, right? The genetics, the proteome, and the microbiome, and the metabolism, and all these different layers of things that are happening, but nobody has really successfully translated those to say, oh, this is how they play together and how they coordinate and how they work in cohesion. And so Dr. Jasby has created basically a platform that allows for that to happen. What does that mean? That means like a depth of insight into how people's body how your body is functioning. What are the potential disease signatures, unlike we've ever really seen before. So it's really cool. It's very advanced science and going into kind of a new era of health testing. But yeah, just wanted to say all that because it's super exciting to be a part of, and glad you guys are here. And I'm going to put one more time in the chat the link that you can go to if you want to get the test and participate in the science that Dr. Jasby is doing at his lab in Phoenix. And any closing remarks from you, Dr. Jasby?
No, thank you guys all for attending, and keep your eye on this space. You will more and more see omics approaches to health assessment. This is where it's going. You are the central dogma of biology. You are the expression of that central dogma from your genome down. And it's not just your genome, it's not just your metabolites. For regular health testing, the metabolism is the most attractive level to test for conditions, but you're going to see this more and more adopted. The omics approaches, AI integration for analysis of big data, as well as digital twinning. If you've never heard it, then just know you heard it here first, and you will slowly see this rolling out. We hope to see this, is right now it's the esoteric plaything of academic scientists like myself, but we will start seeing it in hospitals. We will start seeing it in clinics, and ultimately we will have an easy to use tool rather than, 72 lines of code for doctors to use to really implement this in their assessment, evaluation, and recommendation. So omics, AI, and digital twinning. This is, this is definitely where it's going. And more you'll see this come into the mainstream.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I'll be sending out a replay of this as well. It'll be on the YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/@theriumtest. I'll be posting it there and putting, sending out an email as well. But in the meantime, if you guys have any questions, feel free to email us info@therio.me. And thanks again, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.